The rise and fall of Nokia, the company that owned 50% of all phones. In the year 2007, Nokia sold more phones than the next 3 companies combined. By 2013, the entire company was sold to Microsoft for spare parts. This is the story of the greatest collapse in tech history, and it starts with something you'd never expect. A paper mill in Finland. The year is 1865. A mining engineer named Frederick Idestam opens a small pulp mill on the banks of the Nykänen river. That's where the name comes from. Nokia. A tiny town in southwestern Finland. For decades the company made paper, then rubber boots, then cables. Nokia wasn't a tech company, it was a survival company. It just kept adapting to whatever the world needed next. And in the 1980s the world needed something new. Mobile phones. Now, you got to understand what phones looked like back then. They were bricks, literal bricks. Motorola had the Dynatac, which weighed almost 2 pounds and cost nearly $4,000. These were toys for Wall Street bankers and Hollywood executives. Nobody imagined regular people would ever carry one, but Nokia did. In 1987, Nokia released the Mobira Cityman. It was still big, still expensive, but something was shifting inside the company. Nokia's CEO at the time, Kari Kairamo, had a vision. He believed mobile phones weren't a luxury. They were the future of human connection. He was right, but he wouldn't live to see it. Kairamo died in 1988 and the company nearly went bankrupt in the early 90s. They were bleeding money. The board brought in a new CEO, a guy named Jorma Ollila, and he made a bet that changed everything. He said, "We're going all in on mobile phones." They sold off the rubber division, the cable division, the television business. Everything that wasn't a phone, gone. People thought he was insane. He wasn't. By 1998, Nokia was the #1 phone maker on the planet. And they didn't just lead the market, they owned it. The Nokia 3310 came out in the year 2000, and it became one of the best-selling products in human history. Over 126 million units sold. That phone was practically indestructible. People joked you could drop it off a building and the building would break first. It wasn't just a phone, it was a cultural icon. Everyone had one. Your mum had one. Your teacher had one. There's a decent chance your first phone call was on a Nokia. At their peak in 2007, Nokia controlled roughly 50% of the global mobile phone market. Half of every phone on Earth had a Nokia logo on it. They had over 112,000 employees in more than 120 countries. Their revenue hit 51 billion euros. They were untouchable, or so they thought, because on January 9th, 2007, a guy in a black turtleneck walked onto a stage in San Francisco. Steve Jobs held up a small glass rectangle and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." The audience laughed and cheered. Nokia's executives didn't laugh, but they didn't panic either, and that was the problem. See, Nokia saw the iPhone and thought it was a joke. No physical keyboard, a fragile glass screen, a terrible camera, and you couldn't even copy and paste text. Nokia engineers looked at it and said, "We build better hardware. We'll be fine." They weren't fine. What Nokia didn't understand was that the game had changed. It wasn't about hardware anymore. It was about software. It was about apps. It was about the experience of touching a screen and feeling like the future was in your hand. Nokia was still playing checkers. Apple started playing chess. And here's the thing that kills me about this story. Nokia actually had a touchscreen phone before Apple did. They had a tablet prototype in 2004. They had engineers working on an App Store concept years before the App Store existed. The ideas were there, the technology was there, but the leadership couldn't pull the trigger. There were too many committees, too many managers protecting their own projects. The company had gotten so big that it was strangling itself. One former Nokia engineer said something I'll never forget. He said, "We had everything we needed to beat the iPhone. We just couldn't get out of our own way." By 2010, the damage was obvious. Nokia's market share was in free fall. Android phones from Samsung and HTC were eating them alive from below. The iPhone was crushing them from above. Nokia was stuck in the middle with an aging operating system called Symbian that felt like it was built in a different century. In a desperate move, the board hired Stephen Elop from Microsoft as their new CEO in 2010. And Elop did something wild. He wrote an internal memo comparing Nokia to a man standing on a burning oil platform in the North Sea. The platform is on fire. The water below is freezing. He has to jump, or he burns. Elop said Nokia was on a burning platform. His solution? Jump into Microsoft's arms. He ditched Symbian, he ditched MeeGo, which was Nokia's promising new system, and he went all in on Windows Phone. It was a disaster. Windows Phone never took off. Developers didn't build apps for it. Consumers didn't want it. Nokia went from 50% of the market to less than 3% in just 6 years. In September 2013, Microsoft bought Nokia's phone division for $7.2 billion. To put that in perspective, at its peak, Nokia was worth over $250 billion. They lost over 96% of their value. More than 18,000 Nokia employees were laid off in the years that followed. The day the deal was announced, Nokia's CEO Stephen Elop stood in front of the press, and by the end of his speech he was in tears. He said, "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost." And honestly, that's not entirely true. They did do something wrong. They did the most dangerous thing a market leader can do. They assumed tomorrow would look like today. Nokia didn't die because they made bad phones. Their phones were incredible. They didn't die because they lacked talent. They had some of the best engineers on earth. They died because they fell in love with what they were, instead of imagining what they could become. Now here's the twist. Nokia didn't actually disappear. After selling the phone business, they pivoted to telecom infrastructure. They bought Alcatel-Lucent. They became one of the biggest players in 5G networks. As of today, Nokia is still a multi-billion-dollar company. Most people just don't know it. But the phones, those are gone, and here's what I keep thinking about. If a company that owned half the world's phones can vanish from your pocket in 6 years, what does that say about any company? What does that say about any of us who think we're too big, too successful, too established to fall? Because the truth is, nobody's too big. Nokia proved that.